Thank you so much for coming out tonight. A special thank you to the Claiming Williams Committee for putting all of this together. A round of applause for them, really. My name is Sharifa. I work in Alumni Relations and Development. This is my first Claiming Williams, and I'm incredibly, incredibly impressed by you as students and by the community. And so I was asked today to introduce our speakers, or keynote speakers. And I am particularly honored to do this for a lot of different reasons. Some of them I won't necessarily be able to go into, but I hope that you guys will take as much from this as our speakers intend, and even more, because they really are assets to our community in every way, shape, and form. So I did not have the pleasure of going to Williams with Chaédria. Let me be clear. The summer that I packed up my dorm room to leave is the summer she actually was packing up to come in. This will age me. But luckily, I was only moving 5 minutes away. I was very happy to be offered a job here at Williams a year after I graduated, and even luckier to have met Shay at an alumni mentor event, her first year at Williams. And just to give you some context, in the last 10 years, I have met more Eves than I can count, of every shape and size, from all over the planet. And I know specifically where on campus I met Chaédria. I know exactly what the content of our conversation was. I know that she told me she wanted to be a writer. She wanted specifically to work at Condé Nast, and that I had to find her alumni to set her up with so that she can talk to them about how to make that particular transition into her career. And she was a freshman, mind you. And a couple of years ago, actually, she tweeted me to say that she still had my business card from that interaction. So Chaédria is not only memorable, she's actually been able to do exactly what it is that she said she wanted to do, and so much more. After completing her MFA at UCLA, she's become a well-established writer. If you are a fan of Elle.com or XO Jane, you've read her work. And even more, so, you know, Chaédria is a remarkable woman in many, many ways. And one of the things that you know when you meet her is that it took a very remarkable family to create Chaédria LaBouvier, and in particular, a very remarkable woman to raise her. Chaédria's mother, Collette Flanagan, is also here with us today. A round of applause for Collette. A former IBM executive, Collette, in a very, very short time, was able to pull together Mothers Against Police Brutality, the organization that both Chaédria and Collette are here to represent today. And to the topic of tonight's discussion, and then also why it is that we thought it was important to bring them to campus. We're here tonight to hear Shay and her mother, who together founded Mothers Against Police Brutality after their son and brother, Clinton Allen, was shot to death 7 times by the Dallas police, by a Dallas police officer in March of 2013. Clinton was unarmed. He was shot once in the arm, 5 times in the chest, and once in the back. Shay's and Collette's experiences in the aftermath of what has officially been deemed a homicide, the indifference of Dallas City Hall, the lack of any assistance to the surviving family, the vilification of Clinton in the media, and finally, the impunity enjoyed by his killer turned their grief into, and anger, and rightly so, into action. So in a very short time, Collette and Shay have been able to turn Mothers Against Police Brutality, into an intergenerational, multi-ethnic, multicultural organization with both local and national presence. Collette went to Oakland, California to meet and begin a partnership with the family of Oscar Grant, a young man that was killed by transit police in 2009 and the subject of the film Fruitvale Station. She went to New York to join the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, which was co-founded by Dr. Cornel West. Dr. West later came to Dallas at Collette's invitation to meet with local activists and attorneys to speak out against police brutality at Friendship West Baptist Church. More recently, Collette represented Mothers Against Police Brutality in Ferguson, Missouri, in the national protests against the police shooting of Michael Grant. The purposes of Mothers Against Police Brutality is to stop the killing of unarmed and mentally ill persons by law enforcement agencies, to change the City of Dallas' deadly force policies and practices, to support families who have lost loved ones to police violence, and to help restore trust between the police and the communities they're sworn to serve and protect. Like many of the sessions you attended today, and that you will participate in later on, we hope to have a productive but difficult conversation about why anti-Black racism and other sentiments of hate rise to the level of state violence, why it persists, and why it matters to all East inside and outside of the purple bubble. One important question you should ask yourself as you become very intimate with the lives and the experiences of Chaédria and Collette tonight is whether those of us with any degree of privilege, derived from claiming Williams or otherwise, are willing to sacrifice that for the sake of mitigating the disproportionate harm that is done in the name of justice, in our names, often, against bodies, lives, families, communities, that we don't always resonate with in the immediacy, in the immediate term, in our very presence. So this is going to be an excellent listening opportunity for you, but also an excellent opportunity for you to ruminate on not only what it means to claim Williams, but what it means to be a human being. And so I'd like you to join me in welcoming to the stage Chaédria LaBouvier and Collette Flanagan.
Good evening. So we're here to talk about police brutality, ostensibly, and I understand that it's a universal topic that everyone's talking about, and we're all talking about the statistics, and we're all talking about what happens, but I don't really know how to talk about that so much as I know how to talk about the personal and how it relates to me. And what I know is that what's so personal at the universal center of this is my brother, Clinton Robert Allen. He's the father of 2 twin boys that kiss his photograph every morning and every night. He is the son that signed every text message to my mother with special bond. He is a brother that was so proud of having a sister in film school that he gave me an agent before I actually had one. My brother had dreams. He wanted to be a rancher like his grandfather and his grandfather's grandfather before him. He wanted his boys to go to Williams. The last time that I spoke to Clinton, we were talking about his trip to LA to visit me. It feels right to come back to Williams. When we lost Clinton, I felt that my life was over. And I think it's important to say that here because at Williams we have such a hard time failing. We have a hard time saying that we need help. We have a hard time saying that things hurt us. We have a hard time saying that we are not as strong as we would like to be. The grief that I felt after I lost my brother completely devastated me. It was beyond anything that my 27 years had ever prepared me for. I felt isolated and alone. In 2013, we as a country and a community did not understand police brutality the way that we do now. It was difficult for people to know what to say to me in a political and personal way. So I sat. I walked away from the beginnings of my television career, and I sat. And before I pulled out my pen, I pulled out my books and my work from Williams. I found meaning in Aeschylus, who warned me that grief would fall drop by drop upon my heart, and solace in Seneca's consolation to Helvia. In the depths of my despair and isolation, I found my tribe with Henry's men in the Crispian Day speech. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. When I felt overwhelmed by the love and grief that I had for Clinton, I found in Shakespeare a compass. When he shall die, take him and cut him out into little stars, and he will make the face of heaven so fine that all the world will be in love with night and pay no worship to the garish sun. I stood on the shoulders of Franz Fanon and Steve Biko as I reached for words that I did not know. I remembered the mentorship of Chris Waters in the history department, which taught me how to tell a story and find truths that are hidden. I was surrounded intensely and profoundly by the lifelong friends that I met here who rallied around me in love and support. My life, as it were, had ended, but it was at the Williams that I always carry with me that I began again. I'm under no illusions that I'm the only one in the Williams community that is a survivor of police brutality. Many students and alumni have reached out to share their stories and thoughts with me. Many have felt silenced or even ashamed to say publicly what happened to them or what they had experienced for fear of what people might say, for fear that it was not polite, for fear that it was not erudite, for fear that it is not what we talk about here at Williams. And I understand that. Police brutality does not look like me, and I understand that too. Police brutality does not look like a third-generation college graduate. Police brutality does not look like someone who is supremely educated. Police brutality does not look like someone who grew up on a golf course. Police brutality does not look like someone that speaks 3 languages. We have this misconception, even if it is unspoken, that police brutality is the province of the Black, the poor, the uneducated, the people that just live their lives all wrong. Without even thinking, we blame the victims. We wonder, what did they do to be shot? Because we don't think that the people that are sworn to protect us would just kill us. I know this because I too thought that way. The beginnings of our journey with Mothers Against Police Brutality happened when the Dallas police came knocking on her door, on my mother's door, March 10th, 2013, at 9:10 a.m. There are no words that can actually prepare you for that. There's nothing you can read in a course book. There's no class that you can take. There's no life experience until you're forced to deal with that prepares you for that. There are no words that prepare you for the jarring juxtaposition of the smiling face that you saw for the last time to the purple lips of someone that is dead, and the purple bruises of bullet entries that are sewn shut. I was there when we identified Clinton. Clinton was shot 7 times unarmed. He had a gunshot in his back from running and under his arms when he was shot while holding his hands up, as Michael Brown was. In the press and to my mother, the Dallas police reported Clinton's death as the result of a fatal wound to the chest. To those not in it, it was just a news story, another case, another instance of a hoodlum getting what he deserved, and another funeral. But police brutality is essentially a history, beginning with the lynchings of post-Reconstruction to the present. The frequencies are actually about the same. It is the story of what comes next. It is the PTSD. It is the professional and personal and financial sacrifices of fighting because you love someone in a place that knows no space or time. It is going public with something so personal because you hope that by standing, that others find the courage to stand too. It is believing that we as a country can do better and that we must do better. Being Clinton's big sister, I remember everything. I remember struggling to hold him as a baby on my hips, helping him with his homework and his college essays. I also remember picking out his socks for his funeral and writing his obituary, a file that sits casually on my desktop with my articles and my scripts. I have been there for it all, and this is police brutality. The bullets that ripped through Clinton were felt by my entire family. Clark Stoller, the Dallas police officer that murdered Clinton, shot every single last one of us too. I know that I'm speaking to a very intelligent crowd, so it doesn't do much to volley back and forth with statistics that you either know, I know, or that can be looked up on Google. I'd rather use this precious time to put those statistics into real time, into a human context. When the statistic reads that every 28 hours a Black person is killed by a law enforcement individual, there are parents, days after identifying their children at morgues and funeral homes, planning bake sales and barbecues to help raise the money to pay for caskets. We had no idea until we started working with families that were struggling with this. And speaking of caskets, they hold an unimaginable and horrific irony that you are probably unaware of. The thing that makes so many Black men hunted by the police, the imagery of a dangerous big Black man, also makes it difficult to bury them. And what I mean by that explicitly is that sometimes it's hard to find caskets for them. The statistics say that of the 162,000 federal cases that were prosecuted in 2010, the most recent year that stats are available, only 11 times did a grand jury decline to indict. Again, that's a federal figure, but the point is that it is incredibly rare for a grand jury to decline to indict. However, the rules are very different for the police. They're so different that the FBI doesn't even keep statistics on police brutality. The effort that my mother and I and the activists that we work with that have compiled statistics from open records requests, working with activists who've spent years cataloging this information, it's safe to say that with regards to Dallas, we have a better idea of what goes on statistically with regards to police brutality than the President of the United States. That should not be happening in America. And given that the FBI does not keep statistics on how often grand juries decline to indict, it's incredibly difficult to track what happens in those grand juries. But we can count at least right now 10 cases where grand juries decline to indict with regards to police officers. Clinton Allen, Ramarley Graham, Oscar Grant, Kamani Gray, Tobias Mackey, Eric Garner, Alan Bluford, Chavis Carter, Eric Garner, Michael Brown. The list really goes on. And the thing that those men all have in common was that they are Black and that that grand juries decline to indict their killers, even with eyewitnesses, even on tape. We saw firsthand how grand juries work. When Clinton's case came before the grand jury, we watched the lawyer for Clark Stoller go into the room where the grand jury convened, as well as police detectives. We saw them high-five each other. We saw them know each other. They all knew each other from previous work with the police department in past cases. Our own lawyer was barred, and the grand jury declined to consider statements from 3 eyewitnesses and my mother. Looking at some of your faces, many of you are shocked right now. Many of you were probably shocked when Darren Wilson and Daniel Pantaleo, the killers of Michael Brown and Eric Garner respectively, got off. Prior to that, prior to the fall of 2004, you probably had no idea what was going on with the police and the grand juries. Many people in America had no idea what injustice, a continued abuse of the state, looked like. As Meg Basong said to me last night, for many white people, the police function as a form of campus security, instructive at worst, life-saving at best. But ultimately, there's the belief that they are here with our best interests in mind. Black America is afforded no such luxury. There's no privilege that can be had by a Black person that should protect us should we meet the wrong cop. There's no degree that can stop a bullet. And how do we know who the wrong cop or the wrong person is? By all accounts, Darren Wilson, Daniel Pantaleo, and Clark Stoller are considered to be upstanding citizens in their communities. I believe they even consider themselves to be good people. I think they may even say that they have Black friends. Yet, Daniel Pantaleo was sued twice in the past for racially motivated misconduct with the NYPD. We know that Clark Stoller had 8 instances of misconduct and excessive force, one including running over a suspect with a squad car. Darren Wilson, after describing the unarmed Michael Brown as a demon charging towards him, said on national television that he would not have changed a thing. It is also worth noting that today would have been Trayvon Martin's 20th birthday. His killer, George Zimmerman, also expressed a lack of remorse and has since been arrested twice on accounts of domestic violence, most recently last week. These are not coincidences. It speaks to larger conversations about violence, the history of white men in America policing Black bodies, our gun laws, which function as an expression of white nationalism in parts of the country, and an over-militarized police force. All of this is connected. In my experience, many people of color know this. I have seen the most resistance to these connections by white people, but I understand. The privilege of whiteness allows people to disassociate themselves from a collective or a larger historical continuums when it is too uncomfortable. No one else is allowed such privilege. In fact, one could say that the humanity for otherness is the privilege to be seen as an individual and not always with one's collective. So what does this unwillingness to engage mean for a community, this disconnect? What does this mean when people on both sides are reluctant to communicate and don't have to? What happens if community is not actually a physical space that we operate in, but rather whom we choose to have meaningful interactions with? What good does it do you if everyone that you talk to looks like you and thinks like you? Is your community whom you spend your time with and you reinforce your beliefs or dismantle them with? Or is it the people that you happen to be sharing oxygen with? I think it's worth considering how we define community and how we use it and how we hide behind it at times. For some, this may feel incredibly uncomfortable, but we must say them because police brutality, racism, exclusion, marginalization, and oppression are uncomfortable. There is no polite, no genteel way to discuss this. This may feel like an indictment of whiteness, but it is not. It is an indictment, though, of identities invested in the invisibility and marginalization of others. It is an indictment of the investment of a privilege to not see differences and understand that lives are lived differently. It is the right to live with that ignorance as a truth. And if we act on the assumption of the neutrality of whiteness, then everyone else that is not white is caught in a game where assimilation and diversity are not acts of truly celebrating who we are, but rather finding proximities to whiteness to make others feel comfortable, or in some cases, to just live. True privilege is the right to live one's life without qualification. It's the right to be mediocre and not be penalized for it, to not be killed for it. To live a double consciousness effortlessly is anything but an average talent. And we must challenge that. We must challenge that requirement that we inadvertently put on our community members to carry our humanity and those that have the privilege to not remember theirs. We must challenge this expectation that people in marginalized groups must carry the consciousness of our society. We must ask ourselves, are we comfortable with others so long as it circles back to values that we are familiar and comfortable with? Can people see their actions collectively in a political or social sense? The implicit racial bias behind many police shootings, disproportionately perpetuated by white male police officers, are informed by life experiences which have inoculated many of them from seeing people of color that they do not personally know or vet as individuals. And because we have acted so long, without even realizing it, on the supremacy of white neutrality, we as a country have not considered how this affects white America. Black parents fear that they will bury their children due to police brutality, whereas white parents fear that they will bury theirs due to school shootings. Yet we have not made the connections between the inability of white America to see themselves collectively and the inability to understand that mass school shootings also source from the same lack of collective reflection and compassion that finds itself at the center of police brutality. And as uncomfortable as it is to think about these things, to say it, we must begin right now. We as a country can no longer wait. We lack the lexicon and vocabulary to functionally talk about race and privilege, but we must begin to open our mouths and hope that sound will eventually come out. Policy cannot change until people do. And people do not change until we begin to discuss, until we begin to discourse, until we begin to have really hard conversations. We must listen and reflect on hard truths and say them as there is no convenient time to talk about these root issues. In fact, the only way to talk about them is to be radical. And I say radical not because I am advocating extremism, but because radical in a mathematical way means the root. And the only way to get to the root issue is to be radical. The reason that we must be radical is that we must make up for lost time. We are over 400 years behind on this conversation. I know that Williams is trying to have these conversations. I know that many of you are grasping, trying to figure out how to say it, when to say it, who to say it to. And I will tell you, when you begin, it is awkward, it is unfinished, it is embarrassing, it is hard, it is unsettling. Everyone is watching you. It is hard to make mistakes publicly. It is hard to watch your friends not know what you are going through or what you are saying. It is hard to watch your friends watch you and people that you've known for 10 years or 5 years or 3 years in an instant become strangers. I know how hard it is to have hard conversations, but we have an obligation to speak up and speak out. We are some of the most educated people on the face of this planet, not just this country, the face of the planet. There is an incredible concentration of intellectual manpower in this room, and it is a sin, it is a disgrace to not use it for something better, for something bigger than yourself. We have an obligation to do heavy lifting. We have an obligation to question our privileges and use them to help. We have a responsibility to go into the world with our sleeves raised, our minds and hearts ready to be changed, and ready to work. But before you go into the world, I say this. Remember to go in love. And I say that not as a hippie, but I say that as a backbone of courage. I say that because it is truly the only thing that lasts. Love is not this intense affection so much as it is trusting in your own humanity and those around you, trusting that we all have a soul. Be so in love with this marvel of life for all of its pain, for all of its delights, that your curiosity and humanity cannot bear the thought of knowing how only you live. Be so in love with the human spirit and condition that you find it in the eyes of everyone that you meet. Challenge yourself to love uncomfortable things the way that you love the familiar. Challenge yourself to love truth the way that you do beliefs. Challenge yourself to find something bigger than what you think you can dismantle and devote your thoughts, your actions, your work, and your life to finding your own personal way of making this world more just, more safe, and more compassionate. JFK said some 52 years ago, "All of this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin." Thank you.
I am one proud mother. I would like to give a special thanks to Williams College and to all the wonderful individuals that came together to put together such an important event as Claiming Williams. I know too well what goes into making an event successful, and I salute all of you. People often ask me, what got you into fighting against police brutality? And my answer is always the same. I didn't choose this fight. This fight chose me. It chose me on March the 10th, 2013, when our family got the knock on the door, as Chaédria had stated, informing us that my son, our brother, Clinton Allen, had been in an accident and that he was deceased. And then we learned the awful truth that Clinton had been shot and killed by a Dallas policeman. And even in that moment, with telling a bereaved family that our son was gone, the Dallas Police Department began to spin their story, trying to convince us of what had happened to Clinton. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, they have the wrong Clinton. They have the wrong Clinton Allen. And I even voiced my concern to the detective, and I was like, are you sure you're at the right house? I mean, Clinton Allen, that's a pretty common name. I just didn't want to believe it. I even remember disconnecting myself and thinking about the real family that this Clinton Allen that they were talking about really belonged to, and how awful it's going to be for them when they find out that they're at the wrong house and they go to the real Clinton Allen's house. And I began to grieve for that mother. But it was him. It was us. My precious baby that I carried, that I birthed, that I loved, that I planned, that I packed his lunch, his first Christmas, first day of school. In one instant, it was gone. It was him, my child. My child was gone. And when I think about that day, I remember thinking that Clinton was my only son that I will ever have in this lifetime, and he was gone. Clinton had been shot 7 times. Now you think about that. 7 times. He was unarmed, and he had been shot 7 times, and once in the back. And I began to grieve for the fact that I knew as a mother that my child must have been afraid. How did he feel? He was such a gentle soul. He was the peacemaker. He would never harm anyone. I remember that immediately the police department disconnected from our family. No one was talking to us, which was very challenging because we're all taught that if you have a problem or if something is happening that's wrong, you call the police department. And we would call and we would call, and no one would talk to us. And as we looked for answers and we weren't getting the answers, the media machine began to roll for the police department. And they began to assassinate Clinton's character. And they began to call him a violent drug addict. And we were just horrified. And we couldn't believe that this was happening. As we began to try and find out how could we fight for Clinton, we went to our city councilman, we went to clergy, we went to friends. I'm an ex-IBM executive, so I have a very broad base of people that I know, and no one was there. And everyone went silent, or they just weren't available. And that began our experience with losing a loved one with police brutality. And when I look at it now and understand police brutality, people were afraid and people didn't believe. Because after all, why would a policeman kill you for nothing? Why would a policeman shoot a person for no reason? What was he doing? What was she doing? And those are the questions that we began to get from people. Everyone was just very confused. But they knew that our family was different. We weren't going away. My 20-plus years of experience as a corporate executive kicked in, and my grief and my pain, I made a deal with myself. And the deal was that I had to take the grief and the pain and place it on the shelf. Because I knew in this instant of losing this precious child that that grief and that pain would be there whenever I needed it. But in this moment, I needed to fight for Clinton. And so the fight began. I started to look into open records. I wanted to find out who else had this happen to. How could this have happened? Does this really happen to other people? As we began to pull open records and to look at the other police shootings, the same thing would surface. It's a staggering number of black and brown men that were being shot by policemen, and egregiously so, being shot from 7 times to 133 times, if you can believe that. Some of these children, and I call them children because every one of you that are here come from a mother. And if you can imagine your mother not ever seeing you again, it is something that will change her DNA. So I refer to these men and women that have been killed by policemen unjustly, police brutality, as children. So we began to see that there was a pattern that emerged. The egregious shootings, some of these victims were shot in places in the back of the head, being handcuffed in a squad car and still being shot in the head. Just egregious patterns of police brutality. It was staggering. Then there was a script that was always playing, and every police shooting that we started to investigate, the officer feared for his life. It was a cookie-cutter phrase, and it was etched in my brain, and I knew that something was awfully wrong with this phrase, I feared for my life, because nationally, all policemen were saying that. But last but not least, we would go to the mothers and we would ask, well, what happened when you lost your child? What was the story? And the same patterns began to emerge. The same questions, well, can you help us? They said that my son was doing drugs, but we never got an autopsy. We never got a toxicology report. The police department won't talk to us. Can you help us? And I remember thinking, this is me. This is happening to our family. It is the same thing. A family that in my mind wasn't supposed to happen to. I send my children to the best schools. We traveled the world, and we loved each other. They were never in any trouble. They were good kids. How could this happen to our family? The one thing that we found is that you must learn and understand your local politics. For us in Dallas, we had a black district attorney who was the most famous district attorney in the nation at the time. They called him Mr. Exonerator because he developed a program that exonerated men, black men mostly, that had been convicted wrongly, and everyone loved him. But during his administration for 8 years, over 44 men in Dallas, unarmed or mentally ill, have been shot and killed by policemen. And this black district attorney never, ever indicted a police officer. So we were up against a very hard battle. The policeman that shot and killed Clinton, Clark Stoller, should have never, ever been a policeman. He had 8 excessive force issues in his record, 1 attempted murder. He had falsified a police record to cover the attempted murder. But the bond and the culture that exists in most police departments are so strong. When you have district attorneys that depend on the same policeman to testify in other cases, they are not going to indict policemen. When you have organizations like the Fraternal Order of Police, if you ever get a moment to Google that, it'll take away your sleep. It's a very powerful organization that lobby for policemen while we are sleeping, while we are feeling comfortable that policemen are there to serve and protect. And let me be clear, our organization is not against policemen, we are against police brutality. But the Fraternal Order of Police lobbies for policemen, and the lobbying is so strong and it is so rooted. This organization also contributes to almost every district attorney's campaign contribution. And so, in short, most of our district attorneys have been purchased by the Fraternal Order of Police nationally. And when you think of that, it's very, very scary. I decided that someone had to stand for our precious black and brown babies and that were being egregiously murdered by policemen that we entrusted our families to. We teach our children to respect the police. As a black mother, I can tell you there is a thing called the talk that your mother gives you. And the talk is this: you are a black man. Do not ride in a car with 3 of your other black buddies at a certain time, because you will get pulled over. And if you are pulled over, be kind, be compliant, and do what they say. You say yes, sir, you say yes, ma'am, and you live. You make it home. And these are the things that we've taught our children for years. And I sometimes feel perhaps we failed our children. We were so busy teaching them to stay alive that we forgot to teach them their rights. We know the history of black men being murdered. Our families know that history of lynchings. We know. And so we want to keep our children safe. So when I hear stories of a black man or a brown man attacking the police or fighting the police, I always challenge that. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but let me tell you, black and brown men's mothers teach them to respect the law because they know, unlike yourselves, if they even ask, "Why are you stopping me? Am I being detained? What did I do?" It instantly becomes a resisting arrest, and the officer feared for his life. And in that quick moment, they can be shot and killed. As a mother and meeting other mothers, when you lose a child, when your child is shot and killed by a police officer that you entrust your families to, it breaks the social contract. It disenfranchises the community, and it leaves the mother broken. And if the mother is broken, the family is broken. And when the family is broken, the community is broken. Mothers Against Police Brutality was birthed from grief and pain. Our organization was created over a year ago, and we have made changes both in Dallas and nationally in that 1 year that would have taken, in most cases, other organizations 10 years. In Dallas, for instance, some of the changes that we've been responsible for. When Clinton was shot and killed by Clark Stoller, he was back on the street in 5 days. And we went to work. We didn't know what we were going up against, and we didn't care. All we knew is that it was wrong, and we had to make it right. And we were successful. And we got Clark Stoller, who killed Clinton, off the street. We got his gun taken away. We got his badge taken away. Until this day, he is not on the streets of Dallas. The other thing that came with that, with us working with politicians in Dallas and demanding change. See, sometimes you have to demand, and sometimes you ask. But don't be afraid to demand. When it comes to our children, we should be demanding. And what came with that change was, in Dallas now, when an officer is involved in any type of shooting, whether it's fatal or non-fatal, he is taken off for a psychological review for 30 days. That has never happened in the history of Dallas. And that evaluation can last up to 90 days. And we understand that we're casting our net pretty wide, but in that 90 days, I assure you that something will fall in the net. Because we have police officers that are ill. They're human. We have police officers that need medication and not a gun. We have police officers that are racist and want to kill. We have police officers that are on medication and shouldn't have a gun. We have police officers that abuse steroids. We have police officers that abuse drugs. And a lot of you probably don't know that the only time that a police officer is drug tested is when they come out of the academy. Now, the plane that Chaédria and I will get on tomorrow, that pilot, I guarantee you, would be randomly drug tested at least 4 times in 1 year. The school bus that we put our children on to go to school, that bus driver that in most cases make $10 or $11 an hour is drug tested. If you were a forklift driver and you were on a forklift and you hit a pallet of Charmin bathroom tissue and you damaged it, they would drug test you. So why aren't we demanding that policemen that we entrust our families to be drug tested? This is where you come in. This is where your moment lies. If everyone in this audience made one call to your local senator or your congressman and say, we want police officers nationally drug tested, it would make a difference. We should demand that police officers be drug tested. In the city of Dallas, We also got a bill that we're working on with Senator Royce West to have all policemen outfitted with lapel cameras. Now, we understand that having lapel cameras are fantastic, but we're drilling down even more. We want laws attached to that lapel camera. If you are an officer that's wearing that lapel camera and you turn that camera off, like in the case with Alan Bluford, the officer turned off the lapel camera right before he shot him, that's a felony. It should be a felony. We should hold our police officers to a higher standard. And until Mothers Against Police Brutality in our work, there wasn't even a system that would track how many police killings were happening. There are a bunch of little small towns in Texas that have sheriffs that kill and beat people and all over the nation. We live in America with great resources where if we want, we can tell you how many people ate corn last year. But we have no statistics in place or a database or a requirement that requires police departments to report every time a citizen is killed. Well, that is changing. Because of our work with other organizations and coalitions, we now have a bill on President Obama's desk that is going to make that change, and that is paramount. Until all mothers can send our children to the corner store or to visit a friend or off to college, and can expect that our children will come back and not be killed by a policeman, until we can feel confident that our families are safe, we must all be a part of this fight against police brutality. We have to start asking ourselves some real questions. Why are policemen trained to shoot and kill? Why isn't there a real preservation of life? Does a police officer really have to shoot someone that is unarmed 7, 10, or 15 times? Why aren't policemen de-escalating situations more? Why are they so quick to shoot? These are real questions we should be asking ourselves. Why aren't district attorneys not indicting policemen that shoot and kill children? Why are policemen given impunity? Why aren't policemen drug tested randomly? Last but not least, we must accept the fact that we are no longer talking about a few bad apples. We are talking about a culture that exists, that is rooted, and that has produced orchards of bad apples. We have to understand that there are rogue policemen, there are good policemen, and there are policemen that kill. And when we accept that, we are inclined to act upon that. I submit a challenge to each and every one of you to make a difference in fighting against police brutality. I challenge you not to accept the fact that mothers are losing their children, that mothers have to bury their children because of police brutality. No mother or father should have to bury their child because of police brutality. Your silence kills and it strengthens the oppressor. We must all take a stand against police brutality. When Mothers Against Police Brutality started, the media called us a group calling themselves Mothers Against Police Brutality. And then it was a group called Mothers Against Police Brutality. And then it was the national organization Mothers Against Police Brutality. And now it's Mothers Against Police Brutality, a formidable force against police brutality. If this broken mother can pick up the pieces, if this broken mother whose heart has been snatched out of her chest and crushed to infinity, if this broken mother that I am can build an organization to help other mothers and families fight against police brutality, you certainly can contribute to fight against police brutality. You may not be a person that like to protest or to rally. You may have a special set of skills. You may have the ability to connect people that can help fight against police brutality. Last, I ask you, please, never forget Clinton Allen. Because Clinton Allen lived, and the love that we have for him has changed the landscape of police brutality, and Mothers Against Police Brutality fights for other mothers when no one else would stand. I ask you to always remember Clinton Allen. Thank you.
Hello. First, I'd like to say thank you so much for sharing. It really means a lot to me to hear your stories. One thing that you mentioned was, the interconnectedness, I guess, of the, I don't remember the word for it, the police fraternity, was it?
Oh, yes.
Fraternal order. And that's, the impact of that on the legislature and the attorney generals of in your case, in Texas. Considering that level of entrenchment, of that injustice, what do you think, with that in mind, is the best way to go forward as individuals who want to form a collective? Thank you.
Good question. What you were talking about, the Fraternal Order of Police, it's actually a national organization for policemen. It is their safety net. It is their big brother. What I would suggest locally is to learn what it is. Because when I learned what it was, it changed the way I fought. I understood what I was fighting, that it was bigger than just Clinton, that it was bigger than just a few families, that it was, these killings were backed by laws that protect policemen. And so if you want to dig into that individually, I would suggest a person to learn about the fraternal order and then go to your congressman. So one thing that we do with politicians, we elect them and then we treat them like rock stars. We ask nothing of them. And it is amazing when you go to them and you confront them with certain laws that you know about, they go into action. So start challenging your congressman. And when you do, know what you're challenging. And the Fraternal Order of Police will help you understand why police brutality exists.
I have a question for you. In passing, you had mentioned that Mothers Against Police Brutality was working in a multicultural and intercultural way, and I wondered if you could expand on that and share some of what you've learned and some of the organizing that you've done.
One of the things that, with research and starting to understand how it affects people outside of Dallas, was that in major cities, it manifests itself in very different ways. You know, for instance, in San Francisco and Oakland, police brutality in the Asian American community is a huge issue, an incredibly big issue. And you have issues of culture, you have issues of language barriers, you have issues of immigration status, which also, you know, parallels a lot of the issues with police brutality in the Latino communities. And I think that yes, black men are the ones that are most frequently and disproportionately represented in police brutality, but it's not, it affects everyone in particular ways, and depending upon where you are. And I think, was it 2 weeks ago, there were two girls who were killed by police. And you know, there are also issues with, in Oklahoma, you have Daniel Holzclaw, who raped seven to 10 black women during routine traffic stops. And so yes, there are other places, well, I shouldn't say other places, but depending upon how that conversation happens and where it's happening, it affects a lot of people. And one of the things that we're working on is to expand that. We know that the issue is multicultural. We know that the issue is multiracial. We know that the issue covers mentally ill people. In San Francisco, for instance, for 2011, all of the people that were killed by the San Francisco Police Department were mentally ill. Most people don't know that. And so one of the things that I'm working on is a larger project with writing about focusing on the human side of police brutality and telling some of those stories, because until I started researching it and talking to people through MAPB, I had no idea how it manifests itself in different cities and in different circumstances.
Hello. Thank you very much for coming, giving a wonderful talk. I've got a question. What are your thoughts on expanding the conversation to people who resist sort of having this conversation, or even resist acknowledging that there is a problem?
Well, you know, I think that it's this idea that it doesn't affect people, that it doesn't affect everyone. And I think that that's just not true in the same way. You know, because it goes back to sort of what I was mentioning earlier about, we have root issues in America that manifest themselves in different ways. And so police brutality is a continuum of lynching that never really stopped in a way. Like, you can't go string someone on a tree these days, but it does happen still. But you can use the police in a way, and it still functions in the same way that in 1879 you had the sheriffs that were literally opening the jail cells and letting the mob crowd drag men out. You have essentially the same thing happening where, you know, men in uniform are killing. And so I say that to say that those are root issues that we have to talk about. Entitlement, we have to talk about white privilege, we have to talk about white supremacy, and it's not to make people feel that it's their fault, but understanding that any time you endorse people with a belief that not only are they better, but that they matter more, it's an imbalance in the way that our society works. And that's why I mentioned the issue of school shootings. It's part of the same problem, in that you have this issue of white men disproportionately going into schools and shooting them and shooting their classmates, going into theaters, shooting 52 people. And I think that, it's a hard conversation to have, but it's an important conversation to have, because that lack of understanding that that's not just, those aren't isolated individuals who are just sick, that this is something that's going on in our society about how we construct white male masculinity, how we endorse and give white men this unchecked power. It goes into other areas of society. It's police brutality, it's mass shootings, it's this conversation that we're having on the West Coast about who's included in tech, and so so these issues of privilege, of entitlement, they happen in different industries and they affect everyone. And so it's everyone's problem, because maybe they're not being shot by the police, but they're still having to confront that entitlement in a way.
First, thank you very much for sharing. I'm deeply inspired by your example. I had a question with regard to holding politicians accountable. What would you say if you were to contact your congressman? What would be the things that you would want to say to them, or what would you encourage us to demand or ask that they do that would be most helpful in regard to addressing?
Good question. I would suggest that the hot topics right now on Capitol Hill, because we've taken them there, would be to call your congressman, a congresswoman, and ask them, why aren't policemen drug tested? Why aren't there lapel cameras on every single policeman in the United States, not just in one city? I would also ask them, why isn't there a system clearinghouse to, whereas when a policeman kills and he gets fired in one jurisdiction, he goes to another. And so we're recycling this police brutality because of the blue code that they have. They can get fired for killing your loved one in this state, call their buddy in another state and say, I need a job. And we followed a policeman that have killed like 4 people everywhere he went. So that's another question to ask your congressman, and then demand that you want the change, and then demand a meeting with them. Get a group of students together and ask them to come and talk to you. Say, we want you to come and talk to us on these issues. If you can't get your congressman, state representatives have nothing to do. They will be happy to come, and they're great carrier pigeons back to your congressman, a congresswoman. So those are some of the things that you can do. If anyone ever want to get in contact with us after tonight to ask a question such as that, if you think of something later, just email info@mothersagainstpolicebrutality.com, and it goes to a group of volunteers that we have. And if you want to specifically speak to Chaédria or myself, just put our name in the subject line and it will filter directly to us.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. Could you talk about the ways in which your organization has been affected since
There you
the...
are.
What's that?
I was looking for you.
Oh, hi. Could you talk about how your organization has been affected since the issue of police brutality has been gaining momentum in national media, especially since the shooting of Mike Brown in Ferguson?
Absolutely. Since the shooting of Mike Brown, Mothers Against Police Brutality, even before then, we were doing epic things that no one else was doing. I was telling a group earlier before we got here, we had a great intimate dinner discussion. When I first started this organization, before I started the organization, people thought that I was mad. Even my daughter. People were telling me, oh, you can't say that, or, you can't talk about policemen like that. Our policemen are endeared to us. But we have stepped outside of the box, and it's okay to step outside of the box. This is an ugly business, and we have to be as diligent in protecting our children as policemen are protecting each other. And so some of the things that we've done nationally after the Mike Brown was we went to Ferguson. We went to Capitol Hill. We've had some legislation put on the table that's on the table now. We're part of some Senate committees to have some laws changed. And no one was doing that. Everyone would talk about it, but no group was doing it. It goes back to, we've kind of been taught to treat our politicians like rock stars, like, oh, they're not approachable.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you for coming, but my question is, both of you mentioned when you were talking about Quentin, the media machine, like the narrative or the prevailing narrative on our news stations that affirm that view of people being less than. And I was just wondering what your organization does to combat that, or at least public perception.
Absolutely, and I'll let you take some of that too. But the one thing that we've done, Mothers Against Police Brutality, we have issued a statement to police departments that if you feel that it's necessary to issue the victim's background, which had nothing to do, by the way, when a person is shot and killed, that has become like the hallmark of explaining why they were killed. Oh, he had 3 felonies, and who cares? The cop that shot that kid in that instant knew nothing about that person's background. So we have to change that dialogue about that. But we have sent notices to police departments that if you insist on releasing the victim's background, we will go and find the policeman's background, and we will release that also.
So, and with regards to media, one of the first things that we did was we started a blog, and it was within hours, actually, of losing Clinton. And so I started, it was just in the beginning because we couldn't believe what they were saying. It was obscene. It was, he was high on PCP. We were like, wait, what? They're like, how do you even get a toxicology report in 3 hours? And so, and we realized that it was, when you cases are not won in the courtroom, they're won in the public. And so we just went into I think one of the first things that I wrote was, who Clinton Allen really was. And I was like, I started writing. So because there's always this subtext, right? Like, oh, he was, fighting, he was high. Well, that's all coded, right? They're basically saying that he was a thug and he deserved it. And so you start trying to change that narrative. So from the blog, we were blogging, and then I had a blog, and I started writing more from that place, from the blog. And it was harder to just, as I said, it's hard to just talk about police brutality because it only takes a few seconds to shoot someone. But what you have to talk about are the issues that are behind it and how this happens and why it keeps happening. And so from that, I started writing for different outlets. And so that was something that began to help change narratives and help, my mom says, when she looks at it, that it wasn't just her son. But for me as a writer, it was, okay, well, this isn't just about racism. This is about a lot of other things. And in order to create that space to talk about police brutality, I have to also create these other spaces. So that's sort of where I came in and doing the media behind those really fun issues of privilege and.
Let me say one thing also. We had a group of students tonight that were just fantastic at the dinner, and they were like, what can we do? We have a huge workload, and, we want to be able to contribute and do something, but we don't have a lot of time. And to what you were saying, we've seen it happen and it works. Whenever there's a police shooting, someone, Huffington Post, Daily Kos, or somebody will pick up the story, right? You see the story, you see it on Facebook, see the story. But what we've learned is that the community of policemen, their wives and families and children and cousins, they all come together and they get online and they make remarks. Well, what do you expect the police to do? What do you want them to, they just, and very derogatory remarks. So we have this group of excellent students from Berkeley, and so we'll call them up, and they get together, and they write it out. It is so beautiful. But this is one of the things that you guys can do. When you see things treading like that, jump in, and whenever you can, and it makes a difference. And when that happens, you'll see that the conversation starts to change, and you know that people are being educated, or the ones that want to have the derogatory things to say, they know that they're outnumbered.
So I think we actually have time for one more question, because there's another event that's going to follow this, the Solidarity Walk that's going to follow this. So lots more questions. I know.
We'll make
I
our
know.
answers short.
And we're going to have to pick one. And so
We'll make our answers short.
We'll make our answers short
Okay.
and get into
Okay. So
our response.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I was just wondering if you could talk about your decision to focus specifically on mothers and how it's been getting other community members involved, fathers and sisters.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
She was asking about the focus on mothers and how you get fathers and everyone.
Oh, okay. Yes, fathers are very important, but you have to realize that mothers, if you're going to be born and walk this earth, you're going to come through a woman. And if that mother is broken, the family is broken. If the mother is healthy and we can keep the mother fighting and healthy, the family is healthy, the community is healthy. So when the mom is healthy, like in my instance, my husband was so broken, but he saw me fighting and he started fighting. And so we keep the moms healthy that birth those children, then the whole family will fight.
And just really quickly, practically, a lot of times when men are shot, they leave single family households that are headed by mothers.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, especially as someone who grew up in Dallas County and also was educated in a Dallas public high school, and kind of just segue into that, so I'm thinking about how police brutality is also kind of linked to the over-policing of our high schools. And I was thinking about my high school, for example, how there were so many police officers and there was all these narratives kind of floating around about black children, and then we were also next to an alternative education center, which is basically pre-prison. And I'm thinking what do you think these organizations like yours can do to kind of preface these kind of mass incarcerations, or these kind of the narratives are flowing around about these kids in high school, so that they don't make it to the police station.
Absolutely. We work with Stop Mass Incarceration, founded by Dr. Cornell West, who happens to be my mentor, and Carl Dix. And the one thing an organization like MABP can contribute toward that is we go into the schools and we speak to the campus policemen, the school policemen, and we have meetings with that law enforcement on that campus, and we pull their open record stats. We don't know how many arrests have you made at the school, and what pertained to you arresting that person, and just other factors. And there's something about when you have numbers, it changes things. And so we fight with a lot of numbers. So that's one way that we combat the policing in schools, and it's amazing how they, when the administrators see these numbers, sometimes they are shocked themselves, and different policies become implemented because of that.
In an effort to begin the Solidarity Walk on time, but also acknowledging that there are people who would like to stay and ask some more questions, we are going to take a very short 5-minute break so that those who want to start the walk may start the walk. Those who'd like to stay here and talk with Chaédria and Collette may do that and join the walk in a few moments once their questions are answered. So the walk is coming in and will depart from here. I misunderstood the instructions. The walk will depart from here, and for those folks who want to stay and ask questions, you'll have the opportunity. Thank you so much.